Wonderful. And up next, we have Jake Hadfield. Jake is an extension associate professor here with USU, and he will be talking about integrating cover crops and grazing into small farm systems. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Jake. Thanks for being here.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrea. I really appreciate the introduction. Andrea, can you hear me okay? Is that working?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure I'm all good on those things. So anyway, I'm glad to be here with you guys. I'm excited to talk to you. And specifically on this topic of integrating cover crops and grazing in small farm livestock systems. And so I hope it's okay. I kind of took the general approach that most of you I'm talking to are more livestock focused than maybe soil health or crop focused. And so this presentation is going to be oriented towards that a little bit. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up that I find kind of funny, one of the things when I'm doing a presentation that drives me nuts is having to cite pictures. And so one way I can get around that is utilizing AI or artificial intelligence to generate pictures for me. So this beautiful picture you're seeing here is generated by AI, but there's a couple things I wanted to show you. First of all, if you look at the right here, it put a dog in that's grazing, right? So that's great. And then if you look back at this cow in the back, it looks like it's got two heads. And so while AI does some great things overall, there are some things that it still misses when it's generating images, but I do appreciate it. It helps me to be able to provide great education visual things. So I hope that we can go through that and do learn visually as I go through this presentation. So the theme of the presentation that I'm going to go through, I'm going to call the acronym is KISS. And what it is keep it simple, sweetheart. Okay. And that's something that my dad always used to say. But my goal as I go through and talk about this is I really want to keep it as simple as possible. I think that a lot of times when we discuss cover crops, we really get into, as I'd say, the weeds of it, get into heavy details when I think we can keep it simple and target certain things. And as we keep it simple, later on, we can build off those foundations to help us improve. And this is true when it comes to cover crop and grazing. Now, due to the fact that I think a lot of you are more livestock focused than necessarily cover crop focused, I am going to start about the first 30% of the presentation is going to cover crop specifically, but then I'm really going to hit grazing and tie it into the livestock portion. So stick with me on that and we'll go through it. So some simple things I just wanted to start out with, this will be quick and easy, are just some soil health terms that I'm going to be using as I talk today. So the first one is soil organic matter, which is basically it's organic matter that's in the soil. So it's dead plant, animal, material, microbes, nutrients. It's basically a lot of carbon-based uh, organisms that are in the soil that are helping to improve the soil. It really helps improve soil structure as well as water retention overall. And so it really is an important part in our soil ecosystem. Next is aggregation. You can kind of see it in this image here. Aggregation is basically these little clumps. It's not like clay where you have large, big clumps. It's these little clumps of soil that are stuck together by organic matter. This really helps with structure, water flow. A lot of different things are improved by having aggregation. Now, last but not least is our soil biology. So a lot of this is going to refer to our earthworms, insects. It's going to refer to the roots that are in the soil as well as microorganisms. So basically, it's the living things in the soil. So to start out, one of the things that I think, again, keeping it simple, this is one of the main points I want to hit on. Healthy soil is never bare. Okay. So when we have bare soil, what we're going to see is our soil is losing carbon. It's going to erode easily. It's going to heat up quickly and it's going to hold less water. Okay. So some cool studies that they've done in the past is they've looked at bare soil compared to a field or a crop of some type. In the heat of the summer, they found the bare soil can get over temperatures of 120 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, when you're getting that high of heat, you are basically destroying anything, microorganisms or anything in that soil. Whereas when it's covered, that temperature is more closer to 80, 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you can see why there'd be a difference there. And that's true in our winter area as well. Now, covered soils, what we're going to see is it can give us a foundation to build more organic matter because we have living roots that are in the soil and also biomass. It helps protect our structure, it feeds our microbes, and it also stores moisture. And that's a big component, especially in Utah, especially this year when we're not getting much rain. And so that is definitely something to think about overall. Now, kind of going through the process here, and this is how we'll go through this presentation, is kind of this soil health flywheel. So what we have is we have our cover crops, which lead straight into our cover crops being grazed by livestock. Our livestock produce manure, urine, and also help our roots stimulate. This brings up more microbial activity, which improves our soil and in the end increases our forage production. So cover crops are important in helping build our soil, but a lot of times our goal in building our soil is to improve whatever our cash crop may be, improve our livestock overall. There are a lot of different things that we can look at overall to be able to improve our operations. So one of the first things I wanted to explain to all of you is that with cover crops, a lot of people think they'll come in and within a year or two, they'll make a difference. I actually get a lot of calls from people who really are changing soil on the West Desert and they're really shooting for it. But I think a lot of times they have a hope that they're going to change it in a year or two, when that is not the case. Soil is very much a long-term investment. It's not an overnight thing. Now, some quick changes that we will see as we start to utilize cover crops is we'll first of all see a biology change. So we're going to start to see more living organisms. We're going to start to see earthworms. We're going to start to see different microorganisms start up. And that really is our basis to begin. Next is we're going to start to see in years 3 to 5 aggregation. So that's what I talked about earlier, where organic matter is basically going to clump our soil together and going to make it so it's better structure, better able to retain water, better able to receive oxygen, etc. Right? And honestly, this aggregate stage is a very important stage if we can get to that point. Now, last but not least, when we're looking at 5 to 10 years out, so this is the long game right here, and this is a huge one, is the increase of carbon within our soil. And what I'd say is that's an increase of soil organic matter, like I talked about, increase of a lot of different things that will help improve our soil, okay? And one of the biggest things behind that is because we're putting back into these soils. A lot of times we take and take and take from our soil, so being able to put back and put an investment into that soil is huge. And so that's something to think about as we're going through this process. Just remember, this is not an overnight thing. This is, this is going to take some time. So cover crop decision tree. Now this is not a decision tree for grazing livestock. We'll get to that a little bit later. This is more for if what we're looking for to change in our soils, okay? So the first one is compaction. We deal with a lot of compaction in our state. One of the best things that we can use is our family of brassicas, which is our radishes, turnips, or mustards. Now, the reason that these do so well with compaction is because they have deep, thick roots. If you think about a radish or a turnip or anything like that, they're going to open up space in the soil. And so what I like to call these is our biological tillers. And so they'll go in, they'll open up space in the soil. Now, one thing to remember with our brassicas, they are great for this compaction thing, but they also do not provide a lot of carbon into the soil. They basically, when animals come and graze this, especially cattle, I mean, I've seen it in real life where cattle will pull these turnips out and they'll just start eating them. Okay. And so if they're eating that turnip, there's not much left there to provide to the soil. It does open up some space and helps relieve the compaction, but not a lot of input going back in. Whereas when we're trying to improve structure, one of the biggest things overall is looking at our grasses, okay? So grasses are things like rye, oat, Sudan grass. These really help because they provide extensive root systems. They have really fibrous, small roots that spread rapidly. And this really helps to bind soil particles. This really helps with the aggregation that I talked about and can really improve. Now, one of the other things to remember about grasses is they also produce a lot of biomass. So when you're producing, when I say biomass, that's a lot of yield or top, basically green that goes back into the soil. Now, when they're producing a lot of biomass on top, one of the things to remember is they're also producing a lot of biomass within their root system. So overall, this is going to improve our structure, kind of more focused on that. Now, last but not least is looking at improving our nitrogen, and this is where our legumes are going to come in. And one thing I'd say with this is I also think that legumes are great in increasing our soil biology. So this is things like vetch, peas, clover. You could include alfalfa or sandflint in this, but basically they're going to allow you to fix nitrogen. Now, again, one thing I'm going to say, when this diagram got created, this here's a turnip. That's not a legume, just FYI. But the principle still sticks that basically we want our legumes to fix nitrogen. One suggestion, if you are considering adding legumes, is to find seed that is either inoculated or find the inoculant for the seed. Basically, what that is you put a powder on your seed, and this powder contains the bacteria that help these legumes fix nitrogen. So basically, right when those roots open up in the ground from the seed, they have a bunch of this readily available bacteria that is going to go to town and start helping them fix nitrogen immediately. So that can be a huge boost in being able to change that quickly. So, like I mentioned, I talked about keep it simple, and we're going into quite a bit. There's a lot of choices here to choose from, some different things. But overall, a proven starter mix is going simple, using rye plus vetch plus radish. You get all three of these, can move right along. Now, in a lot of the literature that you're going to read, and this is true, the more biodiversity, so the more species you have, the better that this cover crop can be in improving soil. Now, a lot of that's going to come into happen. And it's important to know, though, that I would rather have someone start out simply and be able to establish a good, strong cover crop and then later come in and put in more biodiversity. So, an example I have here, so me and a couple colleagues, we did some research on cover crop mixes and did some demonstration plots. And this is actually an 8-way mix. So there are 8 different species within this mix. Now, if you go and walk throughout that field, you could probably find all 8 different species. However, one thing I will tell you is that there were about 3 or 4 species that dominated the mix and took over the entire space. And so if we're thinking about this in terms of having biomass or having specific things, those 3 species probably did the most impact, and we might not have needed some of the other species because they were so sparse. So again, I would rather have someone start out and practice with a simple mix to be able to figure out the proper rotation. That way they can come in and add more later. And so just something to keep in mind, again, keeping it simple. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention specifically is talking about soil differences, especially if we're looking at the soil differences between our Western soils and maybe even the Midwestern soils. So here, what I have is I've got a typical Western soil, you might say. I actually think this soil looks a little better than most of our Utah soils, if I'm being honest, but bear with me, right? Now, this is a Midwest soil. Now, I'm sure you guys can clearly see there's some huge differences right from the start, right? Now, if we're looking at the soil specifically, this is a lot lighter color. It does not have that dark, nice look that they have in the Midwest. And I'll be honest, a lot of that has to do with some differences in organic matter. Now, over time, these soils have evolved to be what they are. And it's important to think about, why did that happen? How did these soils evolve? And how did they become this? Now, one of the key things I'm going to tell you is the key is all of this above the soil. Okay. When we think about our Western soils, it's been dry climates. A lot of times we go through droughts and there is not much biomass that stays on top of the soil. We do have biomass, but we do not have a ton, right? And so our Utah soils typically range between 1 to 2% organic matter, which is pretty low overall. Now, if we go to our Midwest soils, where these were native grasslands that had large herds of bison that went and grazed through, had large amounts of biomass, you can clearly see the difference. Whereas in some of our Midwest states, we see 4 to 7% of organic matter, which is a huge difference from us. And one of the things I will say that's probably our number one limiting factor in what changed these two soils was the fact of how much rainfall they get compared to how much rainfall we get. That's a factor that we need to think about, and it's an important one to understand why so much organic matter may be here and how little may be here as well. Now, one of the things I will say is these all have impacts, right? But there are other impacts that go into this as well, not just simply the water and different things. So, thinking about Utah and our unique adaptations that we have, water is our main limiting factor. So, just keep that in mind. In our smaller farm systems, a lot of times we have irrigation access, which is going to help us ease that. But again, it's something to keep in mind when we're doing our cover crops. Next, it's always important that we plant earlier than we think, okay? I would rather have someone go in too early than too late because our goal is to produce biomass. And for us who are looking to graze cover crops later, our goal needs to be to provide a good crop for our animals so that they can be able to graze it and get something from it. Now, one of the things that we have to think about, especially in years like this year, is we have to terminate earlier in drought. Okay, so a lot of times what I'd suggest is terminating about 2 weeks before you plant whatever your main crop may be. However, in a drought like this year, which hopefully we get some rain this week and some snow, we are going to want to terminate even maybe up to 4 weeks early so that we can be able to make sure we have moisture for our main crop. Now, just because we're in Utah, one of the things you do have to expect is we are going to have slower soil organic matter gains. Again, I said it's a long-term investment. Just remember that as you go through. So, one of the last points I want to bring up in our dry climate, soil organic matter is our water storage. So an increase in soil organic matter can be huge. That's a lot of the reason why people utilize compost so much in our area is because it increases that soil organic matter quickly, allowing us to have better water storage in our soils. Okay, so cover crop planning guide. I am just going to cover this really quick here. Fall is the primary window that we're targeting because usually winter is when we have bare soils. Our cool season cover crops, rye, vetch, and radish are great for this time. Planting ideally would happen late August to mid-September. That's kind of the goal we're shooting. And then late September, if we get to late September and haven't planted anything, our rye is going to be our best bet just because it likes cold soils, so it can handle that. Now, spring options, we might look at oats, peas, barley, vetch. Again, plant early in the spring to be able to make sure you have a crop for your livestock. If we're utilizing early vegetables, doing things like, I don't know, carrots, peas, different things like that, but we want to come graze or cover crop and graze after, things like buckwheat. I have oats here. Oats might not be the best for a summer grass, but Sudan grass, these are all warm season cover crops that can make a huge difference in being able to have yield overall. Again, main point I want to make, biomass is key. Biomass is going to be the main driving change in our soil, so that's something to think about. Now, one of the things we've got to think about, and grazing needs to be included in this as well, is cover crop termination. So after we raise a cover crop, we have to get rid of that cover crop. Okay, and there's multiple ways. Mowing's a great one that provides a lot of biomass back to the soil. Crimping can be a great one. Winter killing. Grazing is also an option. One of the things I'll say is I don't suggest overgrazing unless you're trying to terminate your cover crop. One other thing to think about when grazing livestock on cover crop, it's important that you go and have livestock graze your cover crop before it goes to seed. One, it gives your livestock a nutritional boost, but two, it's going to make it so that if you don't want that cover crop to come back, it doesn't have an avenue to come back in a sense. And so that's just something important to think about overall. Okay, now I'm to the grazing section. I got a little long-winded on that first section, but I hope you stuck with me and you livestock, because I'm a livestock kid through and through. So this is my area that I love, okay? So cover crops alone are great. They do great things. However, cover crops and livestock can be transformational when we combine them. Animals are going to convert our plant biomass into biologically active nutrients that stimulate soil life. And that's the huge part, right? If you think about our biomass, if it just falls on the soil, it's going to take a lot of work for that to be ingrained in the soil. It'll happen, but there's a lot of work that goes in between it. Ruminants basically do a lot of the work for us, or livestock, I should say, in general, to be able to break down these nutrients so they're easily absorbed by the soil. And that's huge. I mean, that we're basically just accelerating everything. Now, a lot of you have probably heard about grazing being a great thing as well as a bad thing. So is grazing a soil builder or soil destroyer? Okay. So, like I mentioned, livestock will accelerate our soil health, but it can also destroy it, but it depends entirely on our management. What are we doing to be able to ensure that either our animals are having success or our cover crops having success? And so that's something we got to think about. Now, our outcomes will specifically depend on the timing, when we are grazing, and how long we're grazing, stocking density, which is how many animals are grazing, as well as how much residue we leave over, okay? One of the biggest things is if we're going to graze our cover crop multiple times throughout a year, we do not want to overgraze it. That is a big part because if we overgraze cover crops early, we basically put at risk that we are going to expose our soil. It's just like in this picture here, right? We want to make sure our soil stays covered, that it has active roots that are growing, and that is a very important part. And so with that, I've got some key rules here that I think are really important when we're thinking about grazing. So my first one, which I believe is the most important overall, is never graze wet soil. If we're looking to improve soil health, one of the quickest things that will destroy that is creating compaction. And when our livestock graze on wet soil, they will create compaction. And that destroys a lot of structure. It destroys a lot of other things in the soil as well. So if we can avoid that, that's our goal. Now, a lot of us might be on smaller acreages who are trying to graze these animals. And so one of the things you might have to think about is creating a sacrifice lot or an area on your property that you don't care about, especially if like your soils get wet, your animals will need a place to go. And so this might be an option to think about as you move forward making plans. Next is leave 40 to 50% residue. I call this take half, leave half. So when our animals go through and graze, it's important that they can go through, take half of it, but leave the other half. So that helps us keep our roots growing as well as our cover crops growing. And that's one thing I do want to stress overall with this is we might think cover crops are just a one-time graze. That is absolutely not true. I know multiple producers who actually graze their cover crops 3 or 4 times throughout the season. And I even know some who can graze in the summer that many times. And that's huge overall, right? So that's something else when we're making management considerations. Don't think it's a one and done. There might be multiple times available. And the last point kind of goes with that is rotating our animals quickly. I would rather have someone rotate too quickly than too late. That's going to be huge. And this is true. This is true in regular pastures that may not be utilizing cover crops. Rotating quickly can be a great tool in helping us to be better able to help our soil. Okay. So think about that. Move your animals, keep them going through your pasture or wherever you may have your cover crops. Now, the last part here, if you're seeing lots of dirt, it means you graze too hard. That's one of the easy visual indicators. If you can see dirt, it's grazing too hard. And I'm sorry, I got a phone going off right here. So, okay, all right. Now, moving on and talking about our different livestock species, one of the biggest things overall is we need to think about an impact ladder when we come to our different species, okay? So at the top of our impact ladder, we're going to have cattle. And what this means is a high impact means that they have the most potential for physical disturbance. Now, you may think, oh, that means they're detrimental. That is not true. On the bottom here, I have a line. Impact is not bad. Unmanaged impact is bad, okay? So not managing it is what's going to be the biggest problem. So our cattle in our small acreage is going to have a high risk of potential compaction and potential damage. Okay. Now you might say, well, that means cattle are all bad. And I would tend to disagree with that because cattle are also known to be able to graze a lot of biomass and they move a lot of biomass through their system. And that's one of the keys I've mentioned earlier in this presentation. Our biomass is going to be our driving factor in improving our soil. So cattle are going to move through that fast and provide easily absorbable nutrients for our soil health, right? But again, we've got to take the balances. There's a balancing act with that. Now, if we look at this on a scale, it's going to go cattle, and then it's going to go to our sheep. It'll move to our goats, and then last but not least, it'll move to poultry. And I'm going to kind of go in a little bit more depth with each of these. So cattle, I already mentioned this quite a bit. Best for high biomass. A ton of forage, like 2,000 pounds of forage, can go quickly when you have cattle on it. Okay, manure cycling is going to be improved. You're going to be moving a lot of manure. And one thing cattle do great, sheep do this great too, is they help stimulate root growth through their grazing. And that's a huge component to remember that you are helping stimulate growing roots, which can provide a lot of carbon in our soils. Now, the biggest risk is pretty obvious. We're going to have a high risk for compaction. We could see a lot of soil damage done very quickly by cattle, and I've seen it happen before. Okay, so that's something you got to think about as you're picking your different species to graze. Now, sheep, they're going to be best for lower compaction, okay? Compared to cattle, they're not going to have the compaction problem that you might see. Overall, the sheep are efficient grazers. They do a great job, and it's going to be a lot easier fencing, right? Ideally, I will tell you, I think sheep are the best in small acreage. They really can be a great avenue in grazing cover crops. Now, there is a risk, and this risk is true across all species about overgrazing. I think sheep will surprise you though how fast they graze. So it's just important that you're remembering to rotate these animals. They may not have the size that cattle do, but overall they still can, they, in a sense, they can put it away is what I'd like to call it. So now, goats are going to be a little bit different. They fit a lot of similarities to our sheep, but there is some differences. Overall, if you have weeds in your cover crops, goats are going to be a great bet for that. Sheep will do great on them too. Overall, the more leafy the mix, so I say browsing mix on this slide, but the more leafy, so if you have a lot of legumes, brassicas, maybe more so than the grasses, that's going to be huge because goats really they really target that leafy special stuff. Now, field edges, goats are good at cleaning them up. A lot of people call goats the biological weed trimmers. So that's something to think about. So the risk with goats is that they're going to target your leafy plant matter first. And what they could do is potentially target it too hard, leaving a lot of your grasses, which may cause some imbalances if you're looking to maintain grazing. Now, last but not least, poultry. It's important that you think about how you use your poultry, okay? You put poultry into a lush field with a lot of biomass in it. I don't know that they're going to get through it, but if you have them strategically following after ruminants, they are going to do a great job. And a lot of you may have seen some different regenerative agriculture posts that talk about this, okay? Putting them after the ruminants, the nice part is what they do is they'll go in, they'll spread the manure, they'll eat flies, reduce the flies, insect count overall, and have minimal compaction. Okay. Chickens really are not going to cause a compaction issue at all. Now, where they're going to have a problem is if you put too many in a small pen and don't move them. I got chickens about 5 years ago and I did not realize the damage they can do by scratching. And they can scratch and destroy pastures. So it's just important that you keep them moving, keep the pastures looking good. We don't want bare soil, so that's an important part overall. So, okay, sorry, I did not see a comment here. Oh, it popped up on my share screen. Integrated biochar can offset compaction woes, especially in smaller farms with high travel areas. Okay, that's perfect. And biochar is something that has been brought up before, so that is something to look at as well. So, okay, so cover crops to graze. There's a few to think about here. Okay, so I have a picture over here that shows just some different types overall that we can have. These three on top, triticale, rye, and oats, these are all cool season grasses, okay? So they are going to yield some high biomass, especially in the spring and in the fall. In the summer months, they will not yield as well because they won't like the heat. So that's something to think about. This sorghum Sudan grass and teff grass, these are warm season grasses. So the issue with these is you cannot plant them until basically I would say late May to early June is the best time to plant these because basically if the soil's too cold, they won't grow. Okay, now when we're looking at our legumes, we've got vetch, clover, and sainfoin. Okay, so vetch does a great job, especially when planted with a grass because it grows really well with the grass, does a great job binding there. Clover is also just a great one. There's actually different types of clover. Red clover is going to fall under your cool season, but there's also clover such as berseem clover, which will be a warm season option. So there's options there. Sainfoin is good for a low, basically a drought tolerant legume. And it also helps to prevent bloat. So there's some good things there. Now, brassicas you're going to look at, we've got mustard, turnip, radish. These can all be great options too. It provides leafy plant matter, especially if we're looking at goats and sheep. That can be a great option there. So anyway, if we're looking at our cool season plants, we want to make sure that we plant in the spring and the fall. Those are our 2 times to plant, and we can be able to graze in the basically late fall, winter, and spring. That's going to be primary times. We can also graze these in the summer. Just know you're not going to get as much growth back during that time. Whereas with our warm season plants, we're going to plant them in the late spring or almost early summer in a sense, and we can graze them throughout the summer. A lot of times what these plants need is water. That's their major drive, is having water. Sorghum Sudan grass, teff grass, berseem clover. Now, one thing I did want to mention with sorghum Sudan grass, this grass is very unique and it provides a great yield. Livestock love it because it has kind of a sweet taste, almost like a molasses to it. So livestock really take to it. However, if this grass gets overstressed by overgrazing or even freezing in the winter, it does produce a toxic substance that can cause our animals to get sick, or even sometimes it can go fatal. So that's just something that's a management concern you got to think about. But one of the things I'll say is a lot of people are like, why would you do it? It's a very palatable grass that yields a lot in the summer, and that is a valuable thing to have. So, okay, cover crop palatability chart. So I'm just going to generally go over this. So 4 stars means that the animals are going to love it. The less 1 star means they're not going to like it that much. Okay. So that's just a comparison here. But overall, just going through this pretty quickly here with time. If we think about a lot of our rye or our cool season grasses, our cattle are going to love it. They're going to go through that biomass and they're going to hit it hard. Sheep are also going to love it. I'd say they like to have a little bit of leafy plant matter as well, but they'll still do well. Goats, like I mentioned, they're not going to hit it as hard. Same with poultry. Now, if we're looking at our legumes, cattle kind of go to the 3 star here. Our sheep and goats are going to love it. That has that leafy plant matter that can really mix in overall. Same with clover, very similar across the board. Clover has a little bit of an advantage with poultry. I think it's due to the leaf shape and different options for the poultry in and of itself. Now, brassicas really are going to do well for our cattle, our sheep, as well as our goats. Poultry will do pretty well with it, all in the same thing. Now, with the brassicas, one warning I want to give you, especially with the turnips and radishes, is there is a choking hazard that comes with eating those large turnips or radishes. And it's important that you just monitor your animals for the first few days, monitor them quite a bit, because they have to learn how to do it. Once they learn how to do it, they do really well. But it is something that you got to think about. And I mentioned the sorghum Sudan grass. I mentioned some of the problems with that, but you can kind of see how the palatability differs among the species. So now a bloat warning I want to give to you, just as you're thinking about putting animals on cover crop. A lot of times we get in winter and we're feeding hay or we're doing something to the fact that we have to supply feed. Now, when the spring comes and we get our cover crop up, we're excited because we want to turn our animals out onto it. Now, one of the things is remember to introduce animals slowly, okay? Because basically, if we turn these animals in when they're hungry, this is when we have our largest chance of bloat risk. We still have a chance of bloat risk even if they're not hungry, but it really can cause some problems. So what I'd suggest is whatever supplemental feed you're using, I would feed all of your livestock and then turn them out onto the new pastures. That way they can get adjusted slowly and make that change. The funny thing with the ruminants is their rumen has to make kind of a, I don't know, you call it a biological change so they can get used to the new lush forage that they're going to enjoy. Now, one thing I did want to say that I forgot to bring up earlier is I've had a lot of producers tell me that they turn their calves out on a lot of this cover crop. And a lot of times they tell me calves can do really well, you know, with those brassicas, the turnips and radishes, they really have gained quite a bit. And so this could be something that could be very profitable for our livestock gains overall. And so it's just something to think about as we're moving through it. Now, I explained this a little bit earlier. This is just kind of driving the point home. Why grazing accelerates soil health. Our livestock are going to convert our plant biomass into manure, urine, microbial foods. All of that is going to lead to our soils being able to cycle through those nutrients faster. It provides a more readily available form of carbon, nutrients, all of the above. And so that's just huge for us to improve our soil health. Now, one of the biggest points that I wanted to make overall is that managed disturbance is what builds our soil. I think a lot of times we think that disturbance is bad in all shape and forms. I know that a lot of people, they mention grazing and they think it's a negative thing because of some of the negative connotations that have happened. But if we think about our natural ecosystems, grazing, trampling, and manure has been a common thing across the board. Okay. I mean, you think about the Midwest, who has some of the best soils, they had some of the most grazing and trampling possible. But what the difference is what harms our soil is the continuous pressure. And that is something that's a risk on our small farms because we have smaller acreages. We do tend to have a risk of putting too much pressure on our soil or on our pastures. And overall, I'll say one thing I love talking about is sustainable pasture management. And in Utah, it's one thing we struggle with because a lot of times we have too many livestock for the land that we have. And so that is something to think about as we move forward. Now, biggest small acreage mistakes, and we've kind of hit on a lot of these already. But first of all, overgrazing. If we come in and overgraze, whether it's established pasture or a cover crop of some sort, that could lead to having more soil health detriment than improvement. Next, grazing wet ground. Again, compaction. Compaction is going to kill us faster than anything else on our soil health journey. Bare soil, that can quickly degrade over time. Continuous grazing, one of the things I put with this is this has a caveat. It depends on how big of an acreage you have, but overall, if you can rotate animals through your pasture, it can lead to greater improvement than just allowing them to go out and graze. A lot of times when they're just allowed to go out and graze, they're going to target their favorite plants first, take them to the ground, and then move on to something else rather than grazing evenly to provide that take half, leave half. Now, last but not least, if you're expecting fast results, that is going to be a huge mistake, in my opinion, just because I think it's going to ruin your motivation to keep moving forward with what you're doing. And again, keep it simple. Start simple so that you can start with something that you can manage and then add to it as you go. Just some things to remember. Residue is armor. The more crop residue we have, the better armor we have. Roots rebuild soil, having living roots in the soil. And recovery matters. Allowing our cover crops to recover after grazing is huge. So that brings us back kind of the beginning, soil health flywheel. Okay. So basically, we've kind of gone through all of this overall, talking about soil health and where we're at. Really, it's that process of allowing our livestock to more efficiently increase our soil health. And that's a huge part to think about as we move through it. Okay, 80-20 rule. Large portion of soil improvement comes from keeping living roots in the ground. That's an important part to remember. Simply, if we really keep this presentation simple, it basically comes down to not allowing our soil to be bare and keeping living roots in the soil. Those are two principles to try and maintain as much as possible. Now, one of the things, don't think that we need expensive inputs. We don't necessarily need expensive inputs, and we don't necessarily need complex mixes, cover crop mixes. Keep it simple. Don't panic too much. If we do want a quick form of organic matter, we can always turn, someone mentioned biochars. There's also compost. There are some options there that can help us turn that quicker. But overall, this is a way that we can keep it sustainable through multiple years and not just have to add extra inputs. Okay, so that's it for me today. Again, I just hope we keep it simple, try and look for opportunities to basically grow slowly, learn slowly, go through the different processes so that we can figure out what works best for our farm and then really dive into the depths or into the weeds to figure out where we can go from there. So anyway, with that, I think I can take questions. Is that correct, Andrea?
Yes, we have 5 minutes left, 4 minutes, and you do have a couple questions in the Q&A.
Sorry.
And yeah, if you want to take a look at those and you can answer them live. Jake, do you have our final slide on your presentation?
Yes, I'll go to it right now.
Okay, go ahead and answer those questions, and then in a few minutes I will talk through the final slide.
Okay, so one of the questions says, what plant did you say reduces bloat? So there's actually multiple. The plant I said is sandfoin, and I might actually type that in the chat so you guys have. Can I type in the chat?
Yes, you should be able to type to everybody.
Okay. And I actually can't remember if there's an I before the N or not, but sandfoin, it's for sure SANFOIN. Can't remember if the I is there after the A or not, so I apologize. But sandfoin, as well as there's some different legumes called birdsfoot trefoil, Sicer milk vetch. A lot of these have they have this special tannin in it, which basically helps reduce bloat. and basically makes it so that those animals won't bloat on legumes. So it can be a huge bonus overall. So, oh, any suggestions for cover crops to plant for pigs? For pigs specifically, I think there's a lot of different ways you can go. I like brassicas overall because I think it allows them to root. Now, one of the things I need to help make aware with pigs, just expect soil disturbance. You're going to have some because they're going to root, and some of that's going to be natural, right? You'll have some natural benefits from that, but they can tear up places pretty quickly. So that's just a heads up to keep in mind. One thing I might also mention is there are some options for different varieties of grazing corns, which are labeled more as a cover crop. That could be a great option to also utilize just because those animals do like corn, but having that grazing corn is a little bit different overall. Um, with them, I think you can use some grasses and kind of use those and have them graze the roots and whatnot. But overall, I think if you can provide a little bit more leafy matter and especially those kind of root crops, I think that will really help. Oh, please talk about using goats to graze in an orchard for weed control. I think this is a great option. Now, some of the risks that you're going to have with goats is they can be very harmful to trees. So that is something that you have to be very careful if you're going to graze in an orchard with goats. However, if you can get away with it, one of the greatest parts, one of the most detrimental things that can happen to trees overall is weeds basically taking in the nutrients. So if they can go under and graze under that tree canopy and take away any weed pressure or even grass pressure, that can be huge. That's why goats and sheep are also being utilized and looked at to graze under solar farms. I don't know how many of you have ever heard that before. Um, I think that's a huge, huge thing that can be possible as we move forward. And so, one of the benefits that those goats might also get is they can also have an opportunity to catch drop fruit. So it might be an extra nutrient boost for them as well. So, let's see. I'm just going through. Okay, would rabbits be good for grazing? Now, this is an excellent question. The hard part with rabbits is you're going to have some specific structure to help them graze. You can't just turn them out and allow them to graze. But if you have a tractor or something like that that you can move, rabbits can be a great option. One of the things I will say to avoid is don't turn your rabbits out to really tall fields and different things like that. You want to make sure it's a manageable amount that those rabbits can eat and be able to produce. And so overall, I think rabbits could actually be really good. You're just going to have a lot to get through a lot of biomass. So, oh, Russian thistle. Yeah. Yeah. That one is a hard one. And I'll be honest, I think goats can, I haven't seen much on goats grazing Russian thistle, so I don't know how well they do. I mean, I would take it that goats could do really well on that. Um, that is, yeah, I get that. That's a hard one overall. So,